Hey, Polly, I'm Dad. I'm not actually, but I had to make the joke. So this is gonna be a very, personal video because we're talking about this extremely secret thing that I've definitely not been open about for quite some time now. I've never talked about this in any sort of public context, and definitely this isn't just the first dedicated piece of content on my main channel that I make about it. That is not what happened at all. Definitely, I have never talked about this on my bullshit Patreon live streams that you can join if you become a Patreon patron, but which you definitely shouldn't watch because they're just me talking to my patrons. Nor have I ever published any short story audiobooks on my short story audiobooks channel that deal with the subject matter of polyamory. So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit also about personal trauma that I've experienced, so I hope it doesn't come off as too whiny. But it's important to understand those things, I think, some aspects of my personal journey to place some of the things that happened to me into context. I will also be talking about the high-tier sociological and relationship advice stuff because, I'm me. But mainly it's gonna be about my story and me being the thing that I am. Because the thing that I am is polyamorous. And this is where the trouble begins. Look, listen, okay, this is one of those things where there's a lot of words for a lot of very specific jargon terminology, and a lot of people will get super angry with you if you use the one that they think is wrong. And the reason is this is a thing where, like with everything, ultimately, the nomenclature is extremely idiosyncratic. It's just that there's a lot of people out there who are firmly of the opinion that their personal idiosyncrasies are the gold standard that everyone else must abide by. We don't listen to those people. Personally, I don't even prefer to call myself polyamorous. I prefer to just say poly, but if someone were to refer to me as polyamorous, I wouldn't say that's incorrect. But that is the kind of cornucopia of terminology that evolves when you are basically talking about a term that isn't so much a term that describes a specific thing, but a term that describes the miscellaneous everything else category, which is what poly is. It's the everything that isn't a strictly traditional monogamous relationship type things. You have the standard pattern of two people forming the basis of a nuclear family unit, and that's what the relationship looks like, and there's a lot of things that are not that, and that is all poly. In a more useful sense that makes sense to a lot more people, I think it's a relationship where some level of fucking and or loving happens outside of the strictly two-partner dynamic. And there's really a fucking billion trillion ways that could look like, legitimately. And there's a lot of words for all of those ways. And quite frankly, I don't care about most of those words. What this is about for me is that there are people who are much happier doing the kind of relationships that are not the standard monogamous relationship that society expects people to be in. As such, in this video, when I say the word polyamorous or poly, what I mean is every kind of poly and polyamory. I'm including the polys, the ethical non-monogamous, the maxos, which is a term I just made up. It's all fine and okay and cool. This shouldn't really be a foreign concept to anyone who's aware of the existence of the LGBTQ+ community. The original point of the whole rainbow flag situation is to express with the symbolism of the rainbow that there are a lot of people out there who do not have a simple, easily categorizable expression of sexuality and or gender. It's not necessarily a binary. You're not either necessarily a man or a woman. You're not either necessarily gay or straight. It's all very complicated, and ultimately each individual person is going to have something that they are comfortable with that is probably pretty much unique to them. And that's okay. We're trying to break the mold of gender and sexuality, not make a lot of new molds. Which I guess this is a great opportunity for me to also come out as queer. Not genderqueer, mind you. I may not be the most technically minded gentleman, but I do love my plaid shirts and my blues music and my varnished wood. But after much discussion with me, the board of gay has decided that I am queer, and I also kind of always have been, simply because of the way that I have always viewed sexuality and attraction. I have certain preferences, and there's, things that I like and things that I don't like, but mostly my perception of myself resulting from that was a function of observation, much more than a function of, preliminary exclusion. And also, I'm kind of pan-romantic, and look, I didn't write this diagnosis, okay? They might have written paracetamol on it too. I'm no gay pharmacist. I reckon ultimately what it boils down to is I think a lot of non-binary people are hot, and also maybe a few guys. I just didn't know that that means you qualify, I try to remember people's pronouns out of respect, but in terms of gender, they're kind of like names to me, and that I am much better with faces than names, but I try my best. There's just always been a certain dissociation of explicit gender identity and the societal framework of what gender is supposed to be for me in my head. I just always saw that through a straight lens, because that's what I was told I was. Felt like I had to adjust my way of seeing things to that societal framework I'd been supplied with, as one feels in many cases in life. Turns out I didn't have to do that. All of that I did for nothing. So in retrospect, it really makes sense that all of my partners pretty much have been neurodivergent, bi and pansexual people who just sort of assumed I was queer and then was surprised that I identified as straight. And apparently I don't know how to sit. That's a thing. I don't know how to sit, say many people. Look, folks, it's called active sitting, alright? You have to, even if you sit in the perfect position for your spine, if you do not move around the way you sit, if you do not alternate it sometimes into positions that are not ideal, you're still going to very uniformly fuck up your spine by not moving around and giving different parts of your back an opportunity to relax for a minute. Also, you always have to secure lumbar support. In general, though, I do prefer the queer label over bisexual, which has also been offered to me, and not just because it's an insult, and I do love bedecking myself in those. It's also, much like the poly thing, ambiguous a little bit. It doesn't necessarily describe a very particular thing, it just says, here there be complicated. And I prefer that because I prefer if people don't make assumptions about me, which they still do, but I like to make it as difficult for them as possible. I don't want to be pigeonholed. I think some people are attractive, and I think other people are not attractive. And though there are definitely general patterns to it, there could be identical twins and I find one of them hot and the other not. I can't tell you how exactly it works, and quite frankly, now that I have actually started using the air fryer that my partner gifted me for Christmas, I have better things to do. Actually, I received it in back in November. Shorty gave it to me, and I was scared to use it because it just seemed so wild that you would just put things in the thing and you put it in, you press the button and it just fries it with air. I was convinced there must be some other element to it that the internet was just lying to me about. But it turns out that is exactly how it works. And as someone who owns a €200 French cast iron pot, I feel like that's cheating a little bit. Culinarily speaking, it should not be that easy. All that not necessarily needing to put it into specific terms that I can describe is not a luxury that I have with being poly necessarily. Because almost by definition, a poly relationship is something that tends to include other people. And it is, in my worldview, rather important not to be a cunt to other people. Regardless of whether they are your loved ones, even strangers on the street, but especially your loved ones. So let's get the most important thing out of the way straight off the bat, almost 10 minutes into the video. Polyamory is not cheating. That's right, just because you are kissing, cuddling, fucking other people that are not a partner of yours doesn't mean it's cheating. Now, of course, in a monogamous relationship, that would be cheating. And it is possible to cheat in a poly relationship as well. Because the thing that really defines cheating, especially in the context of poly, is not necessarily that other people were involved, but that the mutually agreed upon rules of the relationship were broken. So most people are in monogamous relationships, right? And just to make this clear, because I always have to say this in every conversation I have, it is fine to be monogamous. It's okay. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life. If that's how you are, if that's who you are, you do it. In fact, in this economy that we're living in right now, I respect the hustle of monogamy. I mean, Jesus Christ, you folks are the real risk takers. Salute to you. So usually most of the rules of monogamous relationships are not specifically created by the people who are in those relationships. The blueprint of monogamy is such a massive meme in the modern zeitgeist, and has been for quite some time, that most people kind of agree on a general area of things that happen that are definitely cheating. And it very much is a betrayal of the other person's trust. It is an unbelievably disrespectful thing to do. But really the betrayal aspect, the going behind someone else's back, the eroding of the trust that you will keep the rules of the relationship in place, is, to many people, the actual problem. They just don't feel like they can articulate that. Because, if you've broken one fundamental rule of our relationship, how can I trust that you won't be breaking the other rules as well? So it should be pretty easy to imagine a type of relationship where all the people involved agree that it's actually cool and okay to love and to fuck and to cuddle other people. And then that wouldn't be cheating because it wouldn't be going against one of the fundamental rules of the relationship. You're not going behind anyone's back. It's all within the context that you've all agreed upon that this will happen in whatever that specific arrangement looks like. And a lot of people, it turns out, do actually think that is okay. In fact, a lot of people are appalled and feel incarcerated by the notion that you're only ever going to be allowed to love and have sex with a single other person for the entire rest of existence. And understanding the imposition that would be on their own happiness, they also do not want to impose this on someone else either. Especially not someone they love. What kind of love would that be where you don't want your loved ones to be as happy as they can be? So a lot of people, they're just sort of making up their own rules for what relationships should look like because they find that the monogamy blueprint that is a big meme in the zeitgeist of our culture just doesn't fit them. And I am one of those people. I know for a fact that I can love more than one person at a time. I know that sometimes love can be a temporary thing that you share with someone for a while. Love also is not necessarily inextricably linked with sex for me. I mean, the two go together like peanut butter and jelly, right? Don't get me wrong. But both peanut butter and jelly are also pretty fantastic on their own, and they pair well with a lot of other things, like friendship, which really to me is the perfect analogy for polyamory. I think most people would agree that it would be fucking absurd if society was structured in a way that everyone agreed you get one friend, and that's it. The one friend you have, there's a contract drawn up to make sure that everyone legally, the state involves itself to make sure everyone understands at the tax office, this is the one friend that you have. And if you play GTA Online with someone who isn't the one friend that legally is the one friend you have, that's fucking rough, dude. That's cheating. That you fucking piece of shit. No, you have different friends. And all of the friendships that you have are different because you're a multifaceted person and they're multifaceted people and there's different amounts of overlap that you have with those people. You might have a best friend, you might have multiple best friends, but you also have friends outside of that. And, it always is different with each of them because you have different interests. And I understand that to other people it isn't that way, but to me, personally, polyamory is literally that simple. I already don't have a super strong line dividing friendship and love, and everybody says that they love their friends, and it's absolutely true. Just think about your relationships the way that you do your friendships. The concepts a little bit bleed into each other and they become way deeper. And a friendship is a type of relationship that you have with another person. So it's really just about the concept of relationships in general. Also, people speak of commitment a lot. who are the people that you can always rely on in life? Who are the bros that come before the people that they're always there for? It's your fucking friends. And a lot of the time, people end up marrying their best friend if there is a romantic spark with them also. Sometimes even out of convenience. There's a lot of monogamous marriages that are happening out of convenience because people don't want to pay as much taxes. And you know, quite frankly, speaking of convenience, how else are you supposed to afford a house if not with your polycule? It is immeasurably funny that, like, late-stage capitalism, which relies on the existence of the nuclear family unit in order to split people up and atomize them as much as possible so they don't form strong communities, has created a set of circumstances where creating strong communities in order to actually be able to afford assets is, like, necessary. Here's my problem with all this. Though I always clearly have been one of these people, especially now that I have that understanding and I look back at myself and the thoughts I used to have and the things I used to say, it's very clear to me. I found it very hard to get in touch with that side of myself and understand it and accept it for what it is until, like, well into my 20s. I know, unheard of story, but true, believe it or not. And I actually believe that there are a number of factors that make learning about poly, understanding being poly, quite difficult, particularly for someone who looks like me. And just to be crystal clear about this, someone who looks like me means like a cis guy with a almost traditionally masculine aesthetic, who identified with the label pretty much straight, but if there ever was a guy I wanted to fuck, I would be okay with it, because what is the problem with that even for his entire life? Yeah, we face a lot of barriers to entry that other people don't. I know that's incredibly hard to hear for a lot of you people, but it's true, so bear with me on this. In many ways, the birthplace of the modern poly lifestyle is the LGBTQ+ community, which is a community that I've always been supportive of, but never really felt particularly drawn to. And not just simply because it doesn't necessarily fit 100% with my personal aesthetic. I like to believe that I am not quite that superficial, but also because I grew up in a culture, in a world that taught me in particular very explicitly that my existence is a problem and bad for those people in particular. And if I were to exist anywhere near them, it would be upsetting for them. And obviously, having grown up the way I grew up, upsetting someone is an incredible crime that you can never recover from. So many of the positive messages floating around the ether of modern media that were directed at that community, they never felt like they were meant for me. They were, you know, someone else's gift. It would have been unspeakably rude of me to open it. And there's a lot more complicated reasons than just the cultural things that I experienced in my life, for the reason that the idea that my existence is an inherent threat and a danger and a massive burden to all of the people I know and don't know is buried very deep inside of my noggin. Not gonna get into that today, but it is the case. And yes, I have been to therapy about it. But this type of cultural attitude sure as shit didn't help. In like mono-heteronormative media, so, you know, most media, someone who looked like me and who was like fucking and loving a lot of different people was always invariably a massive douchebag. Because media invariably portrays that type of guy as a piece of shit womanizer type figure. A sleazebag who lies to people to get sex. You know, like Barney Stinson, Charlie Harper, that kind of thing. Even in the, you know, like Hank Moody type situations where he wasn't really actually that much of an asshole, but people still hated him by association. He was just accidentally an asshole a lot of the time. And even when the sleazebag asshole manipulative behavior was sort of glorified a little bit in those pieces of media, so the intent was not to explicitly portray them as a massive cunt, I have always had my own brain up in the head cavity to see that obviously they were being a cunt to other people. No matter how much the media in question was like, yes, this is cool, I saw it and I didn't like it. You know, like with the historical kings as well, with their big old harems, which is a big no-no word in the poly community. I thought when I was younger that was cool, and I look into it, and they keep women as like basically slaves. That's what that shit was, and that was kind of a deal breaker for me. I didn't like that somehow. So especially in the cultural environment that I particularly grew up in, as someone who would be considered a sexually successful man, aka one that basically has a lot of raw numbers, is invariably portrayed as what is, in factual terms, a sexual predator. Because even when the media in question didn't explicitly portray the fallout of what happens when someone is deeply unethical in their selfish quest to get pussy, I knew that it was going on. You don't have to show the characters going to the toilet for me to know that the characters go to the toilet. And in fairness, I just assumed everyone knew this, but apparently people didn't. And me myself found it very difficult to identify with that. And thinking about it in like a cultural systemic context, I see it as slut shaming, and I think slut shaming is bad. You know those moments in childhood when everyone just agrees on something for no particular reason, and then you just go along with it because you've just recently gained the understanding that if you did make your opinion on this public, you would look weird? Yeah, I had that with slutty women too. I think the slut label should be put on everyone, men, women, and all of the other things that also exist as gender identities. And I think it should be a compliment. But right now, it exists as like a really bad stigma type deal, especially for women, or people that society perceives as women. And I always found this very weird, because I thought it was cool that there were people out there having a lot of sex. Granted, I was 14, but I still think that is cool. Back then, I thought it more frequently. After I expressed this once, I was pulled aside by a very serious-faced adult to a serious conversation. I was told never to glorify slutty women again, because as a man, I could never understand their struggle and the fact that they are just broken people who the only reason that they're doing that is because they are broken and don't respect themselves, and no self-respecting woman would ever have sex with more than like 2 people in her life. And me suggesting that it was actually coolio and a-okay for them to be doing that if they want to, was me being an entitled asshole. This adult was a woman, by the way, self-described avowed radical feminist, telling me that all women who like to have sex are mentally deficient. It's just one of the many incidents that I had during my life that have made me develop a very complicated relationship with my own sexuality. Point is, all of the guys that were sort of the closest thing to being poly that they could have been, that looked like me in the media I grew up with, none of them were ethical. They were all just nice performatively. And I found it very difficult to identify with that. I know this is a whole trope in straight dating culture, the whole bad boy vibe, which I personally never super understood, but I tried to live up to it because of, I wanted to fuck. While at the same time trying to square the circle that this whole bad boy thing felt so terribly middle class to me. For context, in spite of my accent, I very much did not grow up upper class either. But there's this middle class desire for badness by people who don't really understand what badness really feels like within yourself. I had, when I was a teenager, done a few very, very, very bad things in my life. And even with like the sociopathic mind of a teenager that all teenagers have, they're all fucking sociopaths, I felt horrible. Being a bad person does in fact feel bad. Why do you think it's the people who commit evil acts their whole life are so fucking emotionally stunted? And so while I kinda didn't understand why girls would want that, I did it to get their attention. Back then I was thinking of it as only girls, okay? And I think especially pickup artists, they grab this cultural trope a lot, and they teach that way that you need to be an asshole in order to get what you want, which I think has poisoned straight dating culture, if not all dating culture in general. To a point where people, and I can't claim that I am not included in this because I often feel this also until the point where I examine what I'm thinking about the world, feel that like being nice, if someone is being nice to me, to people, That's suspicious. If there's not, like, especially in the dating arena, if there's not, like, an element of being rude and negging and whatever the fuck the terms are for that, it's sus, as they say. And we understand the not engaging in manipulative behavior or, like, changing your personality to suit some other person until eventually you sort of slowly pull back the mask as somehow being more manipulative than being actually manipulative. Because we are at the point where we just assume that whatever is presented to us is a facade constructed by someone who's trying to get in our pants. Think about how fucking insane that is. Thus, being a deceitful piece of shit creep was pretty much the only image, the only archetype that was presented to me by society that was even remotely close to how I felt inside. It wasn't particularly close, but it was certainly closer than most other things. But I didn't want to be a piece of shit in order to live my dreams, so much like I used to identify as straight, I kinda identified as monogamous, insofar as that was pretty much the only thing that I knew about, so I didn't explicitly identify as being monogamous, because all the discourse about this was happening in the LGBTQ+ community. Because those are the people that already have to have all the vast conversations about the socially constructed nature of gender and sexuality, so why not also have those conversations about relationships? They understood that all of these social conventions were made up bullshit and they could, if they chose to, live differently. In theory, at least. I also thought the first part, but I didn't even consider the second part. I thought that there was just something wrong with me and I could either become a sociopath or hide that for the rest of my life. When I eventually became an adult, I know, hard to believe, and then started dating, the few times that I did bring up related concepts to this, I immediately received an unfathomable amount of pushback. I was entitled and evil and heartless, and what do you think you are, Barney Stinson? It wasn't even necessarily like my partner saying this, but like everyone, which just confirmed to me that the only way I could exist as someone who was remotely poly was by being a dick. And it also wouldn't really be the life I wanted to live, because I kind of, didn't want to have to hide these things from the various different people. I wanted them to ideally be able to also be with each other if they were compatible. In my early 20s, I began seeing portrayals in media of poly relationships that were like actual poly relationships. People who were in thruples and group relationships and who had open marriages and who were like nice and respectful of each other's boundaries and all that. Loyal, didn't shame each other for being slutty. But it was always either one of two things. It was grimy. The people they involved, they were broken. That was the reason they were poly, right? The only reason is because they were not normal. There was something kaput with them, and that doomed the relationship from the start. I was in a several-year-long committed relationship in my early 20s, and quite frankly, it was pretty good, aside from the fact that I didn't really feel like I could be myself. We weren't dysfunctional. We weren't grimy. She actually is literally still one of my best friends today. Or the poly relationship was LGBT, where usually it was celebrated a lot more. There was a lot less dysfunctionality, aside from the usual dysfunctionality that media does like to generally portray LGBTQ+ people as having. I was able to identify with that a little more, but I always felt isolated from it. I remember watching Sense8 back when it first originally came out, however many years ago that was. I watched it on Netflix because it had the Wachowski label, and I was a big Wachowski guy. I love everything the Wachowskis had done. I was like, hell yes. Well, I mean, except for like Jupiter Ascending. That movie fucking sucked ass, dude. It was so bad. I saw it at the cinema expecting like another Cloud Atlas, which is one of my favorite films. And I genuinely thought I'd walked into the wrong theater. Right, and I watched Sense8, and I thought to myself, hell fucking yes, dude, this rules. How do I get in on this? Because by and large, though there of course were sometimes some problematic elements, you do need a certain bit of drama in any given show. But these people, they respected each other, they treated each other with loyalty and compassion, and not just because they were all mind-linked with each other. It wasn't just reeling someone in with subterfuge for your own gratification. Which, again, I cannot stress enough how much that was the only thing that had been portrayed to me until that point in my life. And I always thought to myself, why do I have to kick you out after I like the cuddling part. You can stay over. A little bit of kindness and domesticity doesn't mean commitment. Commitment communicated as commitment means commitment. As always, happy to remain a positive and supportive influence in the lives of anyone that I had fucked. And now I'm watching Sense8 and I'm seeing that. It is moved into the realm of possibility. So I thought to myself, clearly, this is the gayest shit I have ever seen in my entire life. But it made me feel something. So the gays probably know something about it. They understand it a little better than I do. I'm gonna pick up my gay phone to call the gay hotline to figure this out and ask them some questions, right?
Welcome to Wendy's. How may we help you?
Hi, is this the gay hotline?
I mean, no. We have burgers. You could do something gay with that if you want.
No, I'm saying the gay hot. I was given this. I have questions about some gay stuff that gay people might know things about.
I mean, I could send you over to Carl. He wears a necklace, but this is not the gay hotline.
But what is this then? What kind of operation are you running then?
Sir, this is a Wendy's.
A what?
A Wendy's.
Is that is this like a code thing, like with Dorothy? Because I saw that in a TV show once, where it was the boyfriend of Dorothy or something.
No, sir, this is a Wendy's.
What is it? What do you do at what is happening? What is that place? What is a Wendy's? I've never heard of this.
We sell burgers and burger food accessories.
Like McDonald's?
Yes, but our mascot is better and cuter.
Okay, but is it like a gay Wendy's or a straight Wendy's?
I mean, if you go on Twitter, you might not know, but I don't know.
What do you deliver to Germany though?
You could go to our website and you could find if any locations are in your area.
You're not the gay hotline though.
No.
And I also didn't not just say it didn't just say not the secret passphrase to speak to the gay hotline.
No, they didn't train me on that.
Oh, well, sorry to bother you then. I'm just gonna disconnect. I thank you for I'm going into a tunnel. My plane is crashing.
That's okay. Speak to you later. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Boop, boop, boop. This was my Peter Griffin worst mistake of my life moment. So here was my concern, right? I wanted to participate in the kindness, openness, sexual libertiness that was portrayed to me in this show. But I was still apprehensive about this because in that time, very certainly thinking of myself as sort of straight, I thought I would be intruding on something sacred. And obviously my existence is harmful and a burden to other people. We've been over this. So was I even allowed to break free from the rules of hetero-mononormative society? Or was I just going to have to do penance for the fact of my existence? And, even if I did, how should I get into that in a way which is, nice and not mean? Never experienced as much bundled up hostility as I did in that day of my life. It was crazy. I got called things that I didn't even know the meaning of at the time, and now that I do know the meaning of those things, I don't feel like they made sense back then. Like, the word chaser came up multiple times that I was trying to elbow my way into lesbian spaces. Not once did I in any way mention the word lesbian or any other kind of sexual orientation. But that did seem to be like the consensus, that I was some sort of evil straggart who was trying to predate on LGBTQ plus people, and that's the only reason why I could possibly have just inquired as to this kind of thing that I saw in a fucking TV show. And that really the world would be better off if I killed myself. This was like before I was, like a Z-list internet celebrity. I have never received that many people telling me to commit suicide since. And somebody called me a gamergator, which I suppose back then was still somewhat fresh discourse. Well, I mean, fresh-ish, I suppose. But it was still weird to just randomly throw that at like a burner account. I know now, and I suspected back then, that this is not really how the LGBTQ plus community is just in its totality. It is way too often like that if you do not perfectly adhere to the stereotype of, someone who isn't a wasp. I also had quite a few people reach out to me in private going like, listen, don't worry about those people, they're self-righteous pieces of shit, you've done really nothing wrong. But the fact that those same people didn't feel comfortable saying the things that they said to me in private, in public, kind of told me a lot about the kind of community that I had stumbled into. Bit of a red flag, if you ask me. So I jumped ship, and though this is somewhat of an outlier experience, not as much as I would like, but definitely not necessarily the standard, it really set back my poly journey, and I guess my queer journey as well, by a few years. Eventually, in 2019, my relationship ended and I started to have like a string of short relationships. The lost phase that runs on for like a year after a breakup, roughly, like a couple months, a year. Still sort of friends with pretty much all of them also, just like not very close necessarily. And then in a hilarious twist of cosmic irony, a girl that I had bonded with actually over having seen and enjoyed Sense8, one night, she said to me, "You fuck good, and it would be rude of me not to share that with other people." Not her exact words, but pretty much the essence of the conversation. I feel like the guy in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where he sees himself as like a cosmic baby, understanding a whole new layer of existence that was hitherto undiscovered. It was the first time that I experienced like acceptance and encouragement for the way that I wanted to live. And it came completely unprompted. That no, precipitating conversation had happened to invoke this. That relationship also didn't last super long, but my life did change after that. Because the COVID pandemic happened. Here I was, right? 25 years old, freshly minted, young poly person, ready to actually look into this thing that I now know that it is what I am. Trying to understand and accept myself, not necessarily because of some sudden revelation, but because of a string of many revelations that had finally allowed me to bring the thing that I saw myself socially constructed as in alignment with the way that I felt in my soul. And I cannot tell you, I was so looking forward to living the polyamorous lifestyle 2 weeks from now. Just, 2 weeks of lockdown, just you wear masks, social distancing, wash your hands. 2 weeks and it would all be over. Yeah, we all know how that went, didn't we? We all know that it wasn't just 2 weeks. Now, 2 years of my social life basically being almost entirely in lockdown, especially the aspect where you meet plenty of new people, which is something that I love to do. It did help me, introspect and grow comfortable with myself a lot, which I think is overall a positive experience for me to have had. I also was sent the PDF of The Ethical Slut by Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy, which I think, to me, that's the poly Bible. I think everyone who is poly, and people who are not poly either, just who want to think about what relationships are like structurally, should read this book. Shout out to sort of my poly mentor Jane for that one. It was a time where I could put some distance between myself and, like, dating. But boy oh boy, do I feel fucking robbed of those 2 years of my youth. Which I think is not at all an uncommon experience. And then I come out of the pandemic and suddenly everyone is fucking poly. I really think it's the Zoomers, right? There were poly people among millennials 100% for sure. But it was, culturally speaking, a lot more inaccessible. It was sort of weird, you didn't really speak about it. But I think you know what happened with gay people with, like, the very late millennial age cohort, which was, like, my age cohort, where it was very suddenly there was a shift, and it was just now not just acceptable to be all kinds of gay, but also, like, pretty fucking fucked up to be mean to gay people for being gay. That was not okay. I think in, like, the early Zoomer age cohort that came just after my age cohort, which I know the lines between these two things are extremely blurry, that is the point where the same thing happened for poly. It's just my personal experience of the thing, though. I might be completely wrong about this. Suddenly, it was just accepted. There's still a lot of pushback, but I live in northern Germany. We live, like, 5 years into the future, at least. That being said, being poly is, of course, not at all a new phenomenon. It's become, like, more visible in our society recently, but various forms of poly sort of constellations and arrangements have been acceptable throughout many societies in history. There is evidence that can be reasonably interpreted as poly basically being the default relationship model in pre-agricultural tribal societies. Not necessarily concurrent ones, but ones from, like, before there were agricultural societies. But in fairness, it is always difficult to make interpretations of the cultural practices of such societies, given that the evidence is so unspeakably old. They're so, like, culturally unrelated to anything that we do actually understand. No matter which way you try to spin it, there's always going to be a lot of wishful thinking in that analysis. But what we do know pretty much for certain is that Stone Age people were definitely not, like, just monogamous and that's it. The theory goes that the social construct of monogamy was originally invented by basically the rich people of the agricultural era to ensure that the wealth of the family stayed within the also newly socially constructed concept of the family, and it could be passed down through a particular bloodline. So perhaps outside of the aristocracy there wasn't as much pressure to uphold those kinds of things? At least not before the rise of, like, merchant classes, where there were, like, in modernity especially, but also before that, when there is an increasing cultural pressure on, like, poor people to behave and abide by the social norms of rich people, just, you know, without the money. Which, you know, I just personally, this is a preference of mine, I want the way that my relationships develop with other people to be limited by practical factors such as, like, time and distance and compatibility. Not, like, arbitrary rules made up by a bunch of Bronze Age patriarchs to, like, make sure that their barley fields passed on to their sons. Especially not if breaking those rules hurts literally no one. The problem is that most historical sources document the lives of the rich and pretty much never document the lives of the poor. And if they do document the lives of the poor, I mean, have you heard the rich of today talking about the fucking poor? So while historians and anthropologists and archaeologists are doing excellent work, the fact remains that we have very few sources of that kind of thing, and most of the sources that we do have are extremely biased. So we're probably never going to get, like, a really nuanced picture of the finer details of the cultural norms of those societies. But people were fucking swinging in the 50s, okay? In the 50s, they were doing that. So that didn't come out of nowhere. Even in nominally monogamous societies, there were a lot of forms of non-monogamy, rarely ethical, that were tolerated and had their own rules with varying degrees of social consequences. Just because something isn't the dominant social narrative doesn't mean it is not a social narrative that is interwoven with the dominant social narrative. And of course, it wasn't really considered ethical by the greater society, and by modern poly standards it wouldn't be either. It was usually just like some old rich guy fucking the secretary behind his wife's back, but also definitely his wife knew about this. It still had its own separate ethics and mechanisms. It was okay to cheat on your wife if you were in a certain position in this patriarchal society, but you couldn't leave her for the young side piece. That was an extremely extra fucked up thing to do, because this is the woman that helped you build your empire, and you owed it to her to secure her financial stability. Which of course isn't to say that that never happened. A very famous example of it happening, you can check out my video on Baby Doe Tabber for that. And a lot of couples where infidelity happened, they actually managed to communicate about it enough, or at least compartmentalize it enough, to sort of heal, or just have a band-aid over it that make sure the wound that is still oozing, it isn't ripped open, and remain functional as a monogamous, nominally couple. On the other hand, I do wonder how many divorces happen that really wouldn't have needed to happen, because the problem wasn't that somebody fucked someone else, but that it was a betrayal of the partner's trust. Speaking of cheating, let's talk about jealousy. It's a big deal, and poly people, contrary to popular belief, experience it also. Doesn't mean you're not poly just because you sometimes experience jealousy. In our culture, there is a sort of subtext of jealousy being enshrined as a passionate ideal of love. Though it may drive us to extremes that people do accept and understand to be problematic, we often still delight and secretly are in favor of those kinds of things happening and being done, even though clearly they are fucked up. All is fair in love and war is the kind of saying that perfectly encapsulates that attitude that we take towards jealousy as a culture. And it equates love with the cutthroat zero-sum game arena of warfare? I mean, never mind the fact that there is such a thing as war crimes. There is this notion that there is just one person for you out there. There's one person, and they are there, and they are perfect for you in every way, shape, and form conceivable, and they will always 100% fulfill all of your needs perfectly. There's one person, and defending that is virtuous and good and as important as defending the soil of your homeland. It's a bullshit, absurd notion, of course. There's a lot of different people out there, and you have varying degrees of compatibility with all of them. And to put the burden of providing for all of your emotional and life and relationship needs on one person is unfathomably toxic to me. But that is fundamentally the framing of what we think of as being a romantic relationship, even though we don't like to use the word ownership these days in that kind of context. That is factually what we mean. And this lens gets drilled into our heads from a very early age. So even people who are naturally poly get this cultural framework drilled into our heads. And that matters because that kind of thing influences how we think and how we feel, and what we feel is jealousy. Jealousy is not inherently good or bad. It's like any emotion, just an emotion. A response to a certain type of stimulus. I personally used to feel very jealous. I had some particularly bad experiences with manipulatively induced jealousy. And like many poly people, I managed to overcome this through personal growth. Which is a type of journey that is normal with a lot of different identities. Especially in the LGBTQ+ community, you have people who grew up in certain repressive environments and thus feel deeply guilty and ashamed about whatever their identity and sexuality is. They feel doubt, they feel guilty, they feel like they're not their thing enough, they feel like they don't deserve to be their thing, various types of bad feelings. It depends on the person and how they were raised. It's a sort of internalized self-hatred. Overcoming a problematic relationship with a specific emotion is a very human experience that a lot of people have gone through. You probably have done it at some point, and if not, I hope that whatever this emotion is for you, because pretty much everyone has one of those, you will at some point experience that sort of growth. What I did is I examined jealousy when I felt it, and I tried to understand why I felt it. And one of the big fear, of course, of that was always the oh, I will not get this partner if they are with someone else, or I will lose the partner that I have if they get with someone else. I really think that was this fear was in the driver's seat. And the pain of that, after some examination, it turned out it came not from the idea of someone that I like being with someone else, but with that, precluding my ability to be with that person. In other words, I was pained by my own loss, not by someone else's gain. Even though that was always often very convincingly masquerading as the latter. Because that is culturally the zero-sum game dominance framework that we are programmed with. And if you're poly, and of course the other people in question are poly, that whole thing is not really as much of a problem. Now, of course, you can still be jealous that the person that you have some sort of poly relationship with is currently dedicating their love and attention to a different person when you would like to be on the receiving end of that. It's very normal in a lot of different types of relationships, monogamous relationships too. If the partner is spending a lot of time with their friends, sometimes we become jealous of their friends, or sometimes we just become jealous of our friends because they get to spend time with certain people. And of course there comes a point where that sort of feeling of jealousy becomes somewhat reasonable, when it's at the point of just emotional neglect. But most of the time this jealousy is not at all reasonable and actually rather crippling. It is a key part of adulthood to learn and understand that not everything we want is always available to us immediately. And your partners do not exist exclusively to fill some sort of void that you have within yourself. So it's fine to feel the emotion, but it is just an emotion. It doesn't need to control you. You need to learn to deal with it in a healthy way, and unfortunately the way that most of society has taught us to deal with jealousy is by controlling our partner's behavior, which I don't think is actually very healthy. But there was another emotion in that cocktail. If the fear of losing a partner was the driver, this was the car. And I'm talking about insecurity. Why are they spending time with them instead of me? Am I not good enough? Insecurity is a powerful, crushing feeling, also a form of fear. It makes you feel small and powerless, and personally, I despise feeling that way. A lot of people in my life have strategically attempted to make me feel that way, so that it would be easier for them to abuse and manipulate me. Also an experience probably many of you can relate to. This was actually one of my main motivating factors in the process of why I wanted to understand polyamory better a few years ago. It was because I felt insecure and I wanted to be the kind of person that didn't feel insecure. And so that's what I became. Someone who wasn't afraid that they were inadequate and that there wouldn't be enough left over for them, so to speak. Which sounds really easy, but it absolutely wasn't. It took a lot of years, some therapy, much introspection, and I'm not perfect, I still struggle with that kind of thing sometimes. I think everyone does. Really, part of the journey is accepting that I'm not gonna be perfect, and that is okay. I have grown to like and love myself tremendously nonetheless. And I think the pandemic did help a lot with that, because I was always a person who enjoyed being alone, but over the course of the pandemic, I learned to enjoy being alone with myself. Because here's the thing about feeling jealous about your partner spending time elsewhere at this particular moment, or any other moment, really. Whoever it is that they are with is never, ever going to be better at being you than you. That is, in a sense, the ultimate resource that you always control, because that's why we love people, is for themselves. And if you have someone who loves you and someone who loves someone else, they love both of you for different reasons. But you're not interchangeable, you cannot be replaced with each other, you play different positions on the same team. And in my experience, the more you love and care for yourself, the less insecure you will feel, and the less insecure you feel, the less jealous you end up feeling. And over the course of my journey in that department specifically, I experienced my perception of what it would be like to be poly from multiple people giving me love to me being able to give multiple people love. And I do believe that has made me a lot more attractive to people. And it's a personal growth thing. You don't need other people to do that. That is something you work on for yourself. I did a video about this a while ago where I talk about how seeking out relationships because you're hoping that they will give you something to complete you can drive people away, and that you really need to fill your own cup first. Because since I have started loving myself, I find that I have plenty left over for everyone else. I'm not losing anything by giving it away, I have more than enough of it. And that is something I see in jealous people a lot, like a sort of panic reaction at their own insecurity. An inability to control their own terror at the idea of being inadequate or not perfect. And I feel bad for them because I remember, feeling like that, and I felt fucking miserable. And now I feel, just as a baseline, a lot better, even when I am depressed. And a lot of that actually comes from the successes of other people. Think about this, right? One of your friends, they get a date with their crush, and it goes really well for them. Another friend, they get a promotion at a job that they are good at. Someone who you know to be a good person receives a financial windfall that eases their life. Some random person you've never met manages some wildly difficult or just cool-looking trick shot in the park. Doesn't that make you feel good? Because it sure as shit makes me feel good these days. This ability to be happy for other people's successes is called compersion, and it's basically the opposite of jealousy. And you may experience compersion at your friends' romantic successes all the time. So imagine being able to feel that way about your partner or partners, and them feeling that way about you in return, of course. This does need to be a two-way street, or a intersect four-way roundabout. There we go. This needs to be a roundabout type situation. But to achieve that, you do need to learn how to love and value yourself. And a lot of people find that very difficult, and that's okay. If Rome wasn't built in a day, you don't have to be either. Even if Rome was built in a day, you don't have to be either. You don't need to compare yourself to ancient cities in the Etruscan Valley. That's very toxic to yourself. As I said, I'm far from perfect. I still struggle. It happens. I am now in a wonderful polyamorous relationship with this beautiful young woman, and we care about each other's, things that happen outside of our relationship. We're happy for each other. We are invested in each other. And one of the major aspects of us getting together was us saying, hey, I'm poly. Me too. We are bonding over this. This is a thing that we have in common. And like any relationship, it requires good and clear communication to work. She and I need to trust each other, talk about our feelings with each other, accept our feelings with each other, and work through them. I really think that's something that a lot of people dread, more people than you'd probably think. When it comes to being poly. It can open the world for you by enabling you to live whatever lifestyle you want, but communicating about all that is difficult. Not just at like a skill level of difficult, but just communicating what's bothering you, talking about it sometimes. It can be hard to bring up the energy for it. Because unfortunately, society is still not very good at teaching us non-toxic ways of handling the invariable pressure points and grinding points and issue points that any sort of relationship you will have with any person invariably brings. When you're poly, you do need to be mindful of a few more people than if you just have one. And you also need to be a bit more emotionally self-reliant, even if you do have a network of lovers of your own. Because if you only keep your other people in there so they can gratify you when you need it, and for you to not be gratifying them, this is a little bit of a cunty move. Good monogamous relationships also require a lot of, like, compromise and communication as well, by the way. Just to make this clear. In a way, poly relationships require less compromise, but more communication. But your mileage may vary on that. And it may sound like a lot of work, but it can also be very liberating. Because it also makes you not the sole source of, like, romantic comfort for your partner. We all draw, like, support and gratification from our friends. It's a thing that everyone, you know, does. This just takes that a level deeper. We are networks of people, and, you know, as a network, we can stand strong even if some of the nerds within that network sometimes feel a little weak. I mean, that's basically just how communities work and why rich people have always tried to, like, shear them apart and atomize them as much as possible. It creates security, which, depending on the type of relationship, can mean financial security as well. Pooling your resources with more people that you know does give you a big advantage, as it makes more resources available to more people. Not everyone needs their own electric drill. Now, of course, once we start talking about, like, poly and resources, people often feel like things are beginning to get dangerous. They're afraid of mooches and leeches and whatever other kind of weird terminology has been developed by the propaganda machine to sort of separate them from the support of other people. And I'm not going to get into that today. But of course, your safety is an important thing to keep in mind. And it is a concern that I am often surprised to hear quite a lot. Is being poly even safe? A lot of them, they're just worried about, like, the spread of STDs, which, wear protection with people you're not explicitly fluid bonded with. It's not that hard. Just wear protection and practice safe sex. Smell it when you give oral. Trust your nose. And of course, especially among women, you know, the physical danger and all that are prevalent ideas, but they usually do have a lot of, like, mechanisms in place to make sure that the people they do get into that kind of situation with are not physically dangerous. And in a way, many feel safer when there's a poly situation around, because it's like, yeah, I mean, there's all these people who are basically vouching for the fact that this person is not dangerous. Many of them also are just worried about, like, bad people. You know, people who are manipulative, emotional vampires, people who are, like, narcissists who are just looking to build their own little high control group, which is just a fancy term for cult. And I have to admit that the poly scene does offer an environment where those kinds of situations and people can thrive in. Like, this isn't just about, like, breaking your heart or anything. This is, like, seriously unethical shit to do with the mental state of other people. And they will lie to you to be able to do that. I personally think that I am more careful about this kind of thing than I need to be because of my own personal experiences. Here's the thing, though. I don't actually believe that there are necessarily more self-righteous assholes in poly than anywhere else. It's just the ones that exist here, much like the ones that exist in, like, the LGBTQ plus scene, where there's also a lot of vulnerable people for this kind of thing. They're like the smart ones, because there's like a higher level of discourse that you need to be able to control in order to manipulate in these kinds of spaces. People like that exist everywhere in society, especially, I mean, in monogamous relationships, there's plenty of extremely abusive ones. I think we just see them more readily in marginal spaces because we are, from the get-go, taught that marginal spaces are dangerous. We are confronted with more readily available bad examples than good examples, even though they would be just as available if we actually looked for them, and that really throws off our availability heuristic. As time goes on, it doesn't matter if you poly or anything, you will probably become better at identifying people like that and, like, cutting them out of your life before they become actually problematic. A lot of clues there, especially in the way that they treat other people. But really, honestly, I don't think they're more common here than anywhere else necessarily. But hey, look, if you want to be careful, hooking up with someone that you met at a bar is fine and dandy. But even with someone that you're purely interested in a sort of friends with benefits type relationship with, it is okay to, like, keep a little room to breathe, to actually build, like, a rapport, a proper friendship, to make sure everyone is comfortable, yourself included. I know, I used to not give a shit about my own comfort. That's also something that I learned to do, and it has massively improved my life. You don't need to do something just because other people are pressuring you to do it, or because it seems chic or hip or whatever other cultural word that is sort of French sounding. I guess what I'm trying to say is, even if you're not a massive slut, and I say that word with all the love and affection, because if you are that, call me. But if you're not, you are also welcome at the Poly Hangout. I feel like that is an underrepresented trope, and I want to make a little bit of space for you folks. I know that I sometimes find myself in that same camp. And that is gonna be it for me today. Poly is such a huge topic, but I really wanted to sort of focus my personal experience with it, while at the same time not like disclosing any details about my life necessarily. So I did admit a lot of stuff for like privacy and sort of irrelevance reasons. But if you wanted to learn more about this topic, if you want me to make more videos about it at some point in the future, do leave questions that you have down in the comments. That you might want to learn more about. I think the normalization of polyamorous lifestyles is one of the major cultural shifts that are happening at this particular point in time, and I do, in my own interest, of course, want to make my own contribution to that. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. Yes, the novel, I am going to be publishing it this year. And in that spirit, don't be a cunt. And see you around, cunts. But it's affectionate. The context of the word, it's the same word, but the context makes it... There's cultures where... Okay.